Me and Oliver are gonna try and do this one together. You can't be kicking through the whole thing though. You gotta sit still. That's like the deal, okay? And what do? You start kicking. Relax. What is up, guys? Nobody's here. It's just me. I'm talking to the camera. It's all good. What is up, guys? It's your boy, Dylan Lenz from the Breaking Point. Stage name, production name, Sticky D. Coming to you with a camera breakdown. I don't want to call it a review, but I do want to break down a couple of cameras for you guys. We get a ton of questions about what cameras we're using, what cameras people should buy for their first camera. They want to make upgrades, lenses, that sort of thing. I want to focus today on the cameras that we use and the different models that there are available, and make some recommendations for people that are either just getting into it or want to advance a little bit. Just starting out, I can tell you that we use pretty much exclusively Sony cameras. Why do we use Sony cameras? We've used Nikon, we've used Lumix, we've used Canon, and we've pretty much switched everything over to Sony at this point. And there's a couple reasons for that. Basically, uniformity is awesome. When we're on all these trips, we have a variety of lenses, variety of cameras, batteries flying all over the place. It's nice when everybody's using kind of the same thing. That way everybody's comfortable, they know the functions of the camera, and Sony seems to be pretty user-friendly, pretty versatile, and gets the job done for us. So that's kind of what we've done, is switch almost exclusively over to Sony. There's some pros for using the Sony cameras. There's some cons. I'll focus first on the pros. The low light on these cameras is phenomenal, and having used Nikon and Canon and Lumix, there's no comparison, at least from the models that I've used previously to the models that I use now for Sony. These cameras see deer, they see action well after dark, well after the shooter can see deer. There was an instance this past September in North Dakota where the cameraman had plenty of light. I believe it was Ryan was filming me, had a good buck come in, full velvet, would have been an awesome buck to take. I couldn't see him behind my pins, but the footage shows, would have been usable footage in my opinion. I could not make an ethical shot. So that just tells you that these cameras are to the point. The technology is incredible, where they're actually seeing stuff that a human eye isn't capable of seeing, which is pretty incredible. I mean, to be at that point right now is awesome. I can't wait to see where it goes from here. The other reason that we use a lot of Sony cameras is they're versatile in their functions. So all these cameras are great at taking photos. That's pretty obvious. If you guys follow our social media, we're posting new photos almost daily. And all those are coming from these cameras. They do a great job. A lot of that depends on the lenses. But focusing more on the video side of things, they're really versatile in that switching from 4K to 1080 to 120 frames a second for slow motion is pretty seamless. You don't notice a huge jog in quality when you're switching around, and having that ability to use 4K 1 second for an interview and flipping it over to 120 frames and getting a kill shot where that arrow's moving slowly across the screen, that's what everybody wants to see, right? It is incredible, and we love doing that. We can slow that down to 20%, which is phenomenal. And a lot of the other camera companies are just getting to that point now, where Sony has had that for, I want to say, probably 4 or 5 years on their prosumer model cameras. I can't think of the Canon camera that just came out, the mirrorless. I don't even know that it has 120 frames a second. And that's something that a lot of outdoor field producers want. They almost need it at this point. And the fact that Canon doesn't have that is just kind of, I don't want to say a red flag, but I think they kind of need to see the writing on the wall, or a lot more people are going to continue to jump over like we did to Sony. The cost for these bodies is pretty affordable, so that's another pro. If you're looking to invest in these cameras, you're going to have to make some costly investments on the lens side, which is kind of a con, but the glass quality is incredible for the higher end stuff. Another thing I'll just touch on is look at the size of these cameras. They're small, they're light, they're good to go. The Canon Nikon body is a little bit bigger, a little bulkier, take up a little bit more room in a pack. And for a lot of hunts, if you're really hoofing it, that size does matter, but I would say for here, these Sonys are just great. Smaller, mirrorless, which is what we're using. And I would say that the mirrorless feature, as much as it is a pro, is also a con. When we're switching lenses back and forth, taking anything off, look at that sensor. It's right there in the wide open. You get a lot of dust on here. A lot of, you know, let's say you switch it over and a little bit of dust gets on there. A little piece of fabric from your gloves or whatever you're wearing gets on there, and you stop down your f-stop to f7, let's say. You're gonna see that if you're looking in a bright light, and it's almost embarrassing to have that on your sensor when you're filming, and there's really not a good way around it. So having a blower on you at all times to constantly check your, you know, I look up at the sky, check it. Okay, there's a little dust on there, take my lens off, blow it off, puff it a bunch of times, get it out of there, bring in some swabs to clean the sensor. It seems like I have to do that a lot more now that I use Sony than I ever did when we were using Nikon or Canon lenses. So that's a con for these cameras. The other, a couple other cons I would say would be third-party lenses aren't that readily available yet for Sony cameras. I imagine they will be down the road, but right now there's only a handful of companies and lenses that are made that are not Sony brand. And so the cost for these Sony lenses is a lot higher than, say, if you wanted to just slap a Sigma or a Tamron or just another party lens onto a Canon or a Nikon that's more readily available for those brands, not so much on the Sony side. So I would say that's another con. Now, when you mention third-party lenses in Sony, it's hard not to talk about adapters. So I actually have an adapter for a lot of the lenses that I'm whining about that Nikon and Sony have, the third-party lenses, that sort of thing. This is a cheapo. This is a comm light. I think I spent like $70 or $80 on it. It still allows some function between the camera and the lens. However, it leaves a lot to be desired. I haven't messed with the Metabones adapters and that sort of thing, but I think switching to Sony has, you know, really just made me want to switch to all the native lenses. So I would recommend that for you if you're going to Sony. Over time, I think you're gonna want to go all native lenses just because of what these adapters leave to be desired. So a lot of people are using those other adapters. They're still using they're still using Canon glass, but I did it for a year or two using adapters and I wasn't pleased with it. The autofocus is laughable, and the communication for changing your f-stop, your aperture, not that great. And not as fast and seamless as just using a native lens. So something to consider, but I would definitely recommend that you just go with the Sony lenses as an initial investment, or consider doing it over time and budgeting for it. But all in all, Sony, awesome. I would definitely recommend getting Sony cameras if you're just getting into it, or if you are looking to make a jump. I would go Sony. There's a lot of other people that, you know, have differing opinions, and I realize that, you know, I have a pretty biased opinion because I've been using these. So I'd love to hear your input on that. Let me know why you think, you know, Sony is or is not the best camera company to go with. I'd love to converse about that kind of stuff. I love talking cameras, obviously, that's why I'm here. But now I want to kind of break down the models that we use from Sony and give some recommendations on, you know, depending on what you're looking for, maybe I can help you out choosing a model. I will start with the 6300 Sony. This is an older camera body. This is actually Jeff Sturgis's from Whitetail Habitat Solutions, so thank you to him for letting me borrow this. But I started working for Jeff in 2016, I believe, and we picked this camera up, and it got the job done. It still gets the job done, and it's very affordable at this point. It's about $750 new, which is incredible to get into the mirrorless Sony game for the features that you get out of it. This camera is 24.2 megapixels, so it takes awesome images. It's an APS-C crop sensor, so it doesn't have full frame, which is a pro and a con in itself. I would say a lot of photographers and videographers want that little extra reach. This gets you there. This gets you 1.5 or 1.6 on any lens that you're using compared to a full frame camera. So I think that's pretty awesome. Con of this camera does not have in-body stabilization. So what that means is if you are handheld or moving around a lot, you're gonna see a lot more jitter in your footage. So keeping that in mind, when you're shopping for lenses, you know, maybe you just want to buy lenses that have stabilization involved or available. So there's newer models of this camera, there's older models of this camera. The A6000 was the predecessor to this camera. It did not have 4K, it did not have slow motion. If you're looking to get into a lot of videography, I would start looking at the A6300 versus the A6000. There's an A6500 which has a touchscreen and does have the image stabilization. So if those are things that are important to you, I would look at the A6500. They just came out with an A6400, but I haven't done a ton of research on it to know. I would believe it's kind of a bridge camera rather than a monumental change in their A6000 line. Another con from these cameras, and for the next camera I'm going to talk about, is the NP-FW50 batteries. These are the previous Sony batteries that have not been upgraded yet. And I looked in the A6400, which is that new camera that they just came out with. It's still using this battery. These batteries suck horribly. They do not last long, especially if it's cold out, if it's windy out. They're not reliable. So when we film in North Dakota late season, I'm actually keeping that battery in my hand, in my pocket, up against a hand warmer, leaving this battery door open on a tripod and slapping it in when something starts to happen that I need to film, because I've seen these batteries jump from 50% to zero, from 70% to zero, depending on how cold it is, how windy it is. The elements take a lot out of these batteries. So that's something to keep in mind when you're investing in these sort of cameras. But all in all, it does 120 frames per second, slow motion, 4K. The low light's pretty good, gets you to about dark on that camera. And being a APS-C camera, you have a lot more options for lenses. And I think I'll come back to that a little bit later. So I'll just hop on to the next camera for now, the A7S II. This is a camera that I picked up, I believe 2 years ago. It's been out since 2015. Great camera, takes some decent photos, 12.2 megapixels. Not, you know, a huge image as far as data and being able to crop that image in post, that sort of thing. But it's good enough. They're pretty images. I love this camera. I've kept it for a few years, and I think I'm gonna hang on to it for a little bit longer. And one of the features that is my favorite on this camera, and can also be looked at as a con, is the fact that it does a crop on the sensor. So this is a full frame camera, but you can crop that sensor, and when you're filming in 120 frames a second slow motion, it's an automatic crop on that sensor 2.2 times. So your lens automatically turns from, say you're using a 70 to 200, becomes a 440 lens on the high end. So that's awesome in my opinion. Image quality on that crop, still pretty good, 1080p. I like it a lot. I use it a ton. Anytime that I'm filming in a tree stand, I'm using this camera as my main rig because I want that focal range to be in tight on animals, have that slow motion. It's great. It does have in-body image stabilization, another key feature. So handheld images, stuff like that, really, really good on this camera. The low light ability of this camera is unreal, unmatched in my opinion as of yet. As far as a video camera goes, this one is still one of the higher top dogs for, you know, the prosumer grade cameras. So something that I would definitely consider yet. I believe this camera comes in about $2,200 if you're buying it new. The other thing is that this still uses that FW50 battery. So a little bit of a con, but moving right along, A7 III right here. This is my new workhorse. I got this last summer. This camera is incredible. It is basically the bridge camera between the A7S II and the A7R III, A7R2, those high-end photography cameras. This is kind of the middleman. Good at video, good at photo. It has a 24.2 megapixel sensor. It does 4K, it does 120 frames slow motion in 1080p. Low light is really, really good on this camera. And the reason that I love this camera is because it's awesome for a B-roll camera, but also something that I can take a ton of photos on and know that they're gonna be high quality. I can crop them in, they're gonna be incredible. Autofocus on this camera is great, but this camera is superior to any of these other ones that I've talked about thus far. So this one comes in at about $1,900. I had to wait about a month for mine. It was on back order. It's such a popular camera. A lot of people that are getting into the higher end photography, higher end video are looking at this camera because it's so affordable and it's so stacked with features. So definitely something to consider, definitely something that I would recommend to people. And another key feature of it is it takes the NP Z100 battery from Sony. The new model battery lasts, in my experience at least twice as long as the previous battery, works in cold conditions. Definitely a pro of these cameras. Moving up to this camera's big brother, I do not have here, but the A7R III. We do have one of those. I should say Brennan has one of those on the crew. I've used it a handful of times. It is a lot of camera. It is a 42.4 megapixel sensor, full frame, 4K, 1080, 120 slow motion, and the photos on that camera are stupid big. They take up a lot of space, but they are incredible images. In my opinion, for most guys at my level or near my level of photography, videography, that's a bit much for a camera. It's $2,900 new. So that kind of tells you, you know, is this camera versus the A7R III, is that $1,000 difference worth it to you? In my opinion, it is not. I would not go for that A7R III unless you are going to be focusing mainly on photography and you need those enormous images. This camera is going to get most of your jobs done, and for a lot smaller price that you could invest into, say, lenses or you know, other facets of your production. That's the main swappable lens cameras. I do want to mention the RX10 from Sony. We do have two of those. I don't have one here, unfortunately, to show you, but that's a great camera for people that are, you know, getting into photography. It has a lens built into it, which is actually a pretty nice feature. It's a 24 to 600 millimeter lens, which is basically everything you need in focal range. 600 millimeters is super tight on images. I believe it has in-body image stabilization. Flaws of those cameras is that it takes the older batteries, not as great, and the low light capability on that camera, not as good as these mirrorless cameras. However, the functions that it does, the slow motion that it does is incredible. I actually bought one of those cameras specifically to get slow motion of an arrow in flight on the way to hitting a deer, and I went down by Brennan in Iowa. I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago now at this point. Bought that camera on the way, used it the following day, and was blown away by the slow motion. Just how smooth it was. It's not the greatest quality. It docks down from, it's at 240 frames a second. I believe it's still right around 1080, maybe a little less, and then down from there. So 480 frames per second, I believe, is 720, and then lower from there. So you're really losing quality as the faster the frames get. However, a lot of people are watching stuff on their phones these days. You're not going to see a ton of quality difference when you're looking on a small screen like that. But just something to note that although the slow motion is incredible on those cameras, the quality isn't quite there. But having that wide range of focal lengths, it is a 20.1 megapixel camera. It goes from f2.4 to f4 on the high end, which is pretty dang good for 600 millimeters. Definitely a camera to consider. Definitely something you could throw in your arsenal either for a backup or if you're just getting into this. So one more thing I do want to talk about, a lens for these cameras, an all-around do-it-all lens that I get questions about all the time. People ask, hey, I'm looking to get into photography. Hey, I'm looking to get into videography. Here's my budget. I don't have a lot to spend. I want to do it all. That's what everybody wants to do nowadays. Get into it for cheap and be able to do it all. In my opinion, if you were going to do that right now, this would be a great option for you. This lens is a 24 to 240 lens. Quality is decent on it. When you're on the far end, 240, it's still relatively clear. You can still get some decently sharp images, nothing super high quality. However, the cost of these two together, you're gonna pay around $1,500. So to get into the game for that price, to have the capabilities of 4K, slow motion, 24 megapixel images, and a stabilized image for video, and you know, just that wide range of focal lengths is pretty darn good. So I would definitely consider this combination if you were just getting into the game. And this camera can also be bought as a kit with an 18 to 55 millimeter lens. It's small, it's like this big. This is not the lens, but about the same size. So that lens actually does a pretty decent job. I believe it's an f3.5 to 5.6. I've taken some awesome clips with that. I've taken some awesome photos with that lens, being a kit lens. So, you know, those kit lenses, a lot of people knock them. They want to move on right away. But if you're just getting into this and trying to be affordable and have a fixed budget, those lenses get the job done a lot of times. So don't overlook that, especially if you're getting a deal on it. And if you're buying this stuff used, I'd be really careful about it, just because a lot of people beat their gear up. If you're buying stuff used, I like to go on eBay and find a studio camera or somebody that did it as a hobby, not somebody that's buying it or using it for the hunting industry. Because I can tell you that these 2 cameras that I've had have seen some shit. They've been muddy, they've been dropped, they've been scratched, and they're still in decent condition considering, but I don't know that I'd want to buy one of these cameras from somebody like me when there's other options out there, say eBay, for example, to buy used from somebody that treats their gear like, you know, pampers it, keeps it in the case all the time, and it goes on a studio every day and back into that case rather than getting slogged around in a backpack, put on a tree arm, sludge through the marshes, that sort of thing. I would definitely consider going used, but I'd just be careful how you do it. Next, protecting these cameras, like I was just talking about, rocking a cage on them is a really, really good idea. You can see how these cameras, even though I just mentioned that they've been through a lot, are actually in really good condition. And a lot of that has to do with these cages. These cages are scratched up, my camera bodies are not. So that's just something to consider. I think you can get into these cages for around $100. And it's nice having the adapters, the availability to throw accessories on the side of your camera. Adds a little bit of weight, but in my opinion, it's worth it. Next tip, goodie bags. These are Crown Royal bags. We got a ton of them. Slapping it on a body, around stuff, throwing it in a backpack. Another way to keep your stuff safe, keep the scratches off of it, that sort of thing. And there are a few other things I want to talk about, and I can save those for other videos because I know this one's already getting long for you guys. If you have any questions, any ideas for new videos, anything else you'd like me to cover, just drop it in the comments. Like I said before, I love talking cameras. Drop me a line, let me know what you think, give me some suggestions, and we will see you in the next one. Until then, hit the like, hit the subscribe, that helps us out a ton. Me and Olive will continue to lounge here. We'll see you guys later. What do you think? How'd I do? I thought it was pretty good. You sleeping over there?